Well, all right, and welcome to the God Talk with the host, Chris Marquardt. I'm so excited to be continuing this message series. This message series is called Jesus versus Religion. We're looking at religion and what it truly means. What it truly means for us to live by a certain religion. So often we look at religion as something that we practice or something that we are. And we see that religion says one thing, but Jesus says another. Religion says that if anyone who has sinned must be put to death, but Christ says anyone who has sinned has already been forgiven, set free, and now they live their life of sin. So often religion binds us in shackles, but Jesus sets us free. And so, as we're going through this, I want this to challenge you guys. I want this message series to challenge you guys. I want this message series to spark up a conversation. Jesus versus religion. Versus what Jesus says versus what religion says. What Christ, our Father, says versus what the world says, what man says. We see that in the Bible, Jesus set a religion, and that was Christianity. And we see now that man has set religion, which is Baptist, Catholic, and all these other different religions. And yes, some of them are good. And I'm not saying that religion is bad at all means, but I'm saying sometimes religion does not always follow the way of God. It often follows the way of man. Because we see that in these different religions, you have to do so many things before you're able to come into God's glory. And we see Jesus saying, "You're already in my glory." We see that religion says death, but Jesus says life. We see that religion says that you have to do all these things, say all the right things. You have to dress a certain way. You can't listen to certain music. And Jesus says, "I don't care about all that. The only thing I care about is that you live your life. But not only live your life, but live your life for me." We see that Christianity and what it truly means to be a Christian is simply following Christ. But we see what religion truly means is following man. And so we see that there are different things to different religions and the way that we perceive it. And so often we look at religion as just something that we grow up in, as something our mother and our father and our brother and our sister and our whole entire family has grown up to believe. But we see that that's often not the case. We see that often religion strays away from what God says and more what man says. Because man will say, if a woman gets a divorce, that she is unclean. Religion says if a girl cuts her hair too short, or has it too long, or wears certain clothes, or listens to certain music, that they are unfit for the kingdom of heaven. And Christ looks at that and he says, "Really?" Because what I see is someone who's living their life. Someone who's living their life with purpose, with meaning. And you really think, and we get to really think about this for a minute. Do you actually think that Jesus cares what your hair looks like? Do you actually care? Do you actually think he cares what you wear? And I'm not talking about wearing these clothes that hardly leave anything to the imagination, if you know what I mean. But Jesus doesn't really care what you wear. He doesn't listen to what kind of music you listen to. He doesn't care how long your hair is. He doesn't care what you have on your face. But what he cares about is your soul. Your soul and where your life is leading. If you're living your life every day as a disciple of Christ, living your life every day as if it was your last, living your day for Christ first, that is all that matters. We see that Jesus says, yes, I don't like divorce, but I also don't like tension in the home. I do not like this man and or woman abusing each other, but instead loving each other in this household. We see that religion says one thing, but Jesus says another. Religion says you have to stone the woman caught in adultery. And Jesus says, I do not condemn this woman caught in adultery. And so if you were with me last week, we looked at that story. We looked at the story of the woman caught in adultery. And how all the religious people, they wanted to stone her. They wanted to put her to death. They were like, oh, look at that. You're caught. But I want you guys to think about something for a moment. As you're reading through that story, there is no mention of the man, is there? What about the guy? Was he not guilty? Was he ignorant? Did the Pharisees just not care? I would like to know what happened to that man. But there is no mention of him. And so we see that religion often puts the perspective on one person. On one person's doing. On one person's wrongdoing more than the others. And I want to tell you guys right now that guy may or may not have known that this woman was married. Maybe that guy just didn't care. Maybe the man was married and the woman was not. And the guy didn't care. And so we see that religion will often blame one person's wrongdoing over the other. And Christ looks at that and says, you know what? No, all sin is equal. There is no sin greater or lesser than the next. And so we see that no matter what kind of sin it is, whether it's adultery, lying, betrayal, it is all the same to me. It's all the same to me. And so, if you guys have your Bibles, man, that's awesome. Blow them off, dust them off, whatever you gotta do to get them open. And today we're going to be in Luke. We're going to be in Luke 19, verse 2. And we're going to be looking today at the story of Zacchaeus. And you guys are thinking, well, why the story of Zacchaeus? Because we see that even in this story, religion had a part to play. We see that religion says one thing, but Jesus says another. Religion says that you shouldn't talk to people who are sinners. You should not love those who are different from you. And Christ says, love those who are different from you. Love those who will prosecute you. Love those who in my name they slander. Love those who are different. Love those who have different hair than you. Who come from a different background than you. Who are different skin color than you. But religion often says don't love those people. Because they're sinners. We see throughout the entire history of man that religion has a big part to play. We see that with the African American cultures. We see that they were prosecuted just because of the skin that they had, just because it was a little bit darker than everyone else's, and so they were prosecuted for that. We see that white people, I'm not sure if that's the right term, but I don't want to offend anyone, but lighter skinned people were prosecuted by the way that they looked. We see that in World War II, how Nazi Germany prosecuted the Jews because they looked different from everyone else. We see that all these different people and all these different things happen in our life. And religion has a big part to play. Has a huge part to play. Because religion says one thing, but Jesus says another. Do you know what Jesus said to the African Americans? He said, you're loved. Don't ever forget that. You are loved. And we see that throughout the whole history of black supremacy, that they were able to find love. They were able to escape slavery. And they were able to make friends with lighter-skinned people. We see that lighter-skinned people were no longer judged, but they were accepted because of the hair that they wear, or the clothes that they have, or the kind of music they listen to. We see that in the war stories of all these Jews and Nazis and all these other people. They found Christ. Even in the midst of something that was so horrible, they found Christ. And Christ said, you guys are loved. So no matter what ethnic you are, no matter what background you have, no matter where you live your life or how you live your life, know that Christ loves you. He loves you. And so if you guys have your Bibles, man, that's awesome. Read along with me. And if you guys don't have your Bibles, just know that I'm deeply offended. And it says this in Luke 19, verse 2. It says this. It says, a man there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was very wealthy. He wanted to see Jesus, but he was short. He could not see over the crowd. How often is it that our perspective gets blocked? Our perspective gets blocked. We cannot see over the walls. We cannot see over the people because we are too short. But we see that in this story, Zacchaeus did not let his shortcomings, get it? Shortcomings, because he was short. He did not let his shortcomings overcome him. It says this. It says he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree, or climbed a sycamore tree, to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said, Zacchaeus, come down. Immediately, I must stay at your house today. Now, I want to take a minute and stop. We see that Zacchaeus was a short man. He was a chief tax collector. And if you guys know any geography or, any history about that time, chief tax collectors or any tax collectors in that day and age were not very liked. Actually, they were despised. People looked at them with disdain, with disgust. They were like, you're going to tax me? Now, today's day and age, tax is kind of just normal. We get taxed for our food. We get taxed for our drinks. It might be 5 cents, it might be 10. It's not really a big deal. But back then, it was a big deal. And so we see that they were not very liked. And Zacchaeus, he was a short man. He was a short man. He could not see over the crowd. But instead of going back home, like we often do, he ran ahead. He said, you know what? Here's a tree. I'm going to climb it. So we see that Jesus walking down that road. And all of a sudden, Jesus just stops for some reason. No one really knows why he stopped. Maybe someone shouted, hey, look, a chief tax collector's in the tree. And Jesus looked up and was like, oh. Or maybe Jesus just felt something and he just had this ability just to sense him, and he just looked up. He said, you know what? What is that man's name? Or maybe Christ already knew his name. He already knew his name. And so we see that he yells up to Zacchaeus, Zacchaeus, come down because I'm staying at your house today. I'm coming over to your house for Thanksgiving. And so he says this to Zacchaeus. He says, I'm going to come over to your house for Thanksgiving dinner today. It's going to be lit. We're going to have turkey and stuffing, and it's just be great. And so it says, when Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I'm going to stay at your house today. We're going to have a fantastic time. I'm going to eat. We're going to praise. It's going to be awesome. So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. But all the people saw this and began to muffle. He has gone to be a guest of a sinner. Or in other words, what business does he have getting cozy with that crook? And so this is what religion